Welcome to our channel, where history comes alive with stories that shaped nations and changed the world. In today's video, we dive deep into Woodrow Wilson and the obsession with controlling free speech, controversial chapter in American history that reveals how freedom of expression was tested like never before. If you're passionate about history, politics, and the lessons they leave behind, you're in the right place. And now, without keeping you waiting any longer, let's get into the video. Picture this. It's 1917, and the United States has just entered World War I. The nation is gripped by fear, paranoia, and a fervent desire for unity. At the helm of this tumultuous period stands President Woodrow Wilson, a man whose legacy would be forever intertwined with one of the most contentious issues in American history: the suppression of free speech. As the world plunged into chaos, Wilson's administration embarked on a crusade to control the narrative, silence dissent, and maintain a facade of national unity. This obsession with controlling free speech would lead to the passage of two infamous pieces of legislation: the Espionage Act of 1917 and the Sedition Act of 1918. The Espionage Act, signed into law on June 15, 1917, was ostensibly designed to prevent interference with military operations and recruitment. However, its broad language and sweeping provisions would soon be used to target anyone deemed a threat to the war effort. The act made it a crime to convey false information with intent to interfere with the armed forces, to promote the success of America's enemies, or to obstruct the recruitment of soldiers. But the government's appetite for control didn't stop there. In 1918, the Sedition Act was passed as an amendment to the Espionage Act, further expanding the government's power to silence dissent. This new law made it illegal to use disloyal, profane, scurrilous, or abusive language about the U.S. government, the flag, or the armed forces. The vague wording of these acts would prove to be a dangerous weapon in the hands of overzealous officials. As these laws took effect, a wave of fear and suspicion swept across the nation. Neighbors turned against neighbors, and the mere whisper of dissent could lead to arrest and imprisonment. The Justice Department, emboldened by its new powers, launched a series of high-profile cases that would test the limits of free speech in America. One of the most notable cases was that of Eugene Vieck, Debs, a prominent socialist leader and five-time presidential candidate. In 1918, Debs gave a speech in Canton, Ohio, criticizing the war and praising those who resisted the draft. For this act of defiance, he was arrested, tried, and sentenced to 10 years in prison. His conviction was upheld by the Supreme Court in a decision that would have far-reaching consequences for free speech in America. Another shocking case was that of Charles Schenck, the General Secretary of the Socialist Party. Schenck was arrested for distributing leaflets that urged resistance to the draft. His case went all the way to the Supreme Court, resulting in the famous clear and present danger test for free speech. Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, Jr., wrote in the unanimous decision that free speech could be restricted when it presented a clear and present danger to the nation. These cases, and many others like them, sent a chilling message across the country. Speak out against the war, and you could find yourself behind bars. The impact of this crackdown on free speech was profound and far-reaching. Newspapers were censored, public gatherings were monitored, and a culture of fear and self-censorship took hold. But perhaps the most intriguing aspect of this dark chapter in American history is the paradox of Woodrow Wilson himself. Here was a man who had built his career as an academic and intellectual, championing the ideals of democracy and freedom. Yet, as president, he presided over one of the most severe crackdowns on civil liberties in U.S. history. Wilson's defenders argue that he was acting out of necessity, driven by the exigencies of wartime. They point to the very real threats of espionage and sabotage that the country faced. Critics, however, see a more sinister motivation: a desire to silence opposition to the war and crush dissenting political movements, particularly socialism and anarchism. The truth, as is often the case in history, likely lies somewhere in between. Wilson was undoubtedly influenced by the paranoia and nationalism of the time, but he also displayed a troubling willingness to sacrifice fundamental freedoms in the name of national security. As the war came to an end, the fervor for censorship began to wane. The Sedition Act was repealed in 1920, and many of those imprisoned under these laws were eventually pardoned. However, the Espionage Act remains on the books to this day, a controversial tool that has been used by successive administrations to prosecute whistleblowers and leakers. The legacy of Wilson's crackdown on free speech is a complex and contentious one. On one hand, it serves as a stark reminder of the fragility of our civil liberties and the dangers of unchecked government power. On the other, it sparked a national conversation about the limits of free speech that continues to this day. In the decades that followed, the Supreme Court would gradually expand protections for free speech, developing a more robust interpretation of the First Amendment. Cases like Brandenburg v. Eck, Ohio in 1969 would establish a higher bar for restricting speech, requiring that it be likely to incite imminent lawless action before it could be prohibited. Yet the tension between national security and civil liberties remains a constant in American life. From the Red Scare of the 1950s to the Patriot Act following 9/11, each generation has grappled with the question of how to balance freedom and security. As we reflect on this chapter of our history, we are left with important questions. How do we protect our nation without sacrificing the very freedoms we hold dear? How do we ensure that the mistakes of the past are not repeated? And perhaps most importantly, how do we foster a society where dissent is not only tolerated but valued as an essential part of democracy? The story of Woodrow Wilson and his obsession with controlling free speech serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of vigilance in protecting our civil liberties. It challenges us to think critically about the actions of our government, even in times of crisis, and to stand up for the principles that form the bedrock of our democracy. As we close this chapter of history, let us carry forward the lessons it teaches us. Let us remember that freedom of speech, however uncomfortable or challenging it may be, is the lifeblood of a healthy democracy. And let us commit ourselves to being the guardians of that freedom, ensuring that future generations can enjoy the liberties that so many have fought to protect. Thank you so much for watching today's video. We truly appreciate your time and support. If you enjoyed this deep dive into history, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. It really helps us grow and bring you more powerful stories. Stay tuned, because many more untold chapters of history are waiting for you here. We'll see you again in the next video. Until then, keep your curiosity alive.